Welcome to Cut the COVID Crap Part 35. Everybody's going to get Omicron, vaccinated or not. Normally, I would discuss the Office of National Statistics or the UK Health Security Agency's weekly update, but since they don't publish it, the relevant details anymore, I'm not going to do that. But I'll just a brief mention. I just watched John Campbell, that you may very well know. He publishes every day a YouTube video usually. Um, his latest one is UK Groundhog Day. I'll put a link in the description below. He is very annoyed about the Office of National Statistics not giving um, spitting out data for um, uh, uh, vaccine-induced antibodies or natural immunity. Um, and rightly so. I mean, if you have the blood samples anyway, you test for antibodies anyway, you might as well say where they're coming from. And and that's the thing with national statistics bureaus. They should focus on statistics and not mixing it with politics. They should put the facts there, and the policymakers should be able to use that and interpret it and uh, base their policies on that. But the statistics bureaus shouldn't be biased with what they publish and not published because it's I don't know, it doesn't fit the narrative. So, um, but yeah, you can still derive some information from it. I briefly mentioned it last week as well, but it's quite relevant. So 99.4% of the adult population in the UK has antibodies. 45% of those have antibodies from natural infection alone. The rest is either vaccination alone or vaccination and recovered from COVID. But a month ago, this percentage was 36%. Uh, um, only 36% of the population had antibodies from infection alone, but the total percentage has not dropped. It has even increased by 0.1%. So despite the 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 fact that we went from 36% of the population having antibodies from infection alone to 45%, that means that and the total number of antibodies, the people with antibodies stay the same. That can only be mean one thing: the vaccination induced antibodies have waned, which we know, of course, is that's a fact, but they wane, and apparently the natural induced ones have not waned. Otherwise, the total percentage would go lower as well. So the fact that the percentage of people with natural antibodies, so to speak, has increased, and the total percentage of the people with antibodies has stayed at the super high level of 99.4%, means that vaccination-induced antibodies wane and natural-induced antibodies don't wane, or at least not for the time being. And whether they're not waning for a year, 2 years, we don't know yet. But for sure, for the vaccinations they do, and the natural disease is um, longer lived protection. And the more I study the data, the more it's clear that we have to go through this. Everybody is going to get Omicron, vaccinated or not. The vaccination may help for preventing bad outcome, but it doesn't stop spreading at all. I mean, every country has to go through it. They have gone through it later or earlier and there's only very few countries which have not yet gone through it. Look at Africa. Africa, there's no problem at all anymore. You can talk about inequality of vaccinations availability, what you want, but Africa doesn't have a high vaccination, has a low vaccination rate, and there's hardly any cases anymore. And if you look at the and so it's basically natural immunity that has done the job. And luckily, in Omicron, the number of deaths has maybe the Africa strategy would have failed if Delta had stayed dominant and was not replaced by a less um, a less malignant Omicron. But we're there where we need to be now, in Africa, in India, in well, I'll get back to Europe in a bit, but like it's elections coming up in Australia, um, and especially in Western Australia, there's still the restrictions. Like, yeah, as an unvaccinated person, you cannot go to a restaurant. Yeah, and they still strongly encourage young kids, 5 to 11, to get vaccinated. I'll get back about that in a minute. And they say, like, see, our policy has helped. Like, we have a super high vaccination rate in Western Australia, especially because of coercion. And still you have to quarantine if you travel internationally and come back if you're unvaccinated in a hotel for a week, not at your own place, but in a hotel. Um, and the policy makers are proud of it, like, because we dealt with the pandemic so well. No, like, okay, they protected Australia quite early, which is a sound thing to do. I gotta say, like, yeah, if you don't know what you're up for, then to close borders if you can, fair enough. But hence they escaped the Delta wave, fair enough. But since Omicron, now Omicron is spreading like pretty much wildfire in Western Australia. But yeah, hospitalizations and deaths are like a tenth of what they projected it to be. It's per capita, so it's really a non-event, you know. But still, they would say like, oh, it's because of our high vaccination rate, etc. No, it's because Omicron is benign, just like like Africa has gone through it. It's benign. Um, well, let's take a look at Denmark. If you look at the recent history of Denmark, and Denmark has been uh, one of the first countries to completely relax all uh, the COVID restrictions in terms of masks and distancing and vaccination. The vaccination rate is around 70 to 80% or something. It's up there. Um, but now more than 50% of the population has tested positive, and the biggest, let's say, positivity rate was roughly between mid January and mid March. In those 2 months, Denmark went from roughly 18% of the population having tested positive to 48%. So that's an increase of 30% in 2 months' time. So that's huge, right? I mean, that's a fast rate of spreading. During that time, um, 300 the rate of people dying was 300 per million, um, over that 2 months period. So you can translate that into 30% of the people got COVID, and for every person that got COVID, or for every thousands people that got COVID, one died. So it went through the country, 30%, and that's of course, I guess, a minimum. There's many untested, but at least 30%. Um, so 0.1% of those died. Not nice, of course, but Denmark has not had a problem with it. It's 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 the deaths per million peaked a bit and was on the high side internationally, but compared to the normal rate of people dying per week, like the let's say the natural rate, yeah, we're talking about in 2 months' time, yeah, that must be roughly around the 1500 mark, like as a rough estimate. So that's roughly so in the worst period in terms of COVID, in terms of deaths in Denmark, 20% of the COVID deaths amounted to 20% of the total deaths. Yeah, I mean, people die from COVID or with COVID. The hospitals were not in panic mode. Yeah, I mean, it's a I don't deny that COVID is not good to have and that COVID leads to deaths, just like the flu does, right? Most people get the flu multiple times in their lives. Yeah, and at some point, if you're older and weaker, you can die from the flu. How is it different from COVID? I mean, again, I'm not saying COVID is a is a I'm not a COVID denier, but yeah, I mean, again, if you're young and healthy, yeah, and on that subject, in the Netherlands, it became clear. I'll try to put a link in the description. It's likely in Dutch, but um, the National Health Advisory Committee, um, they uh, they advised the Dutch government to, yes, make vaccinations available for 5 to 11 year olds, but don't coerce people into it. Make them available, but absolutely no coercion. That was the policy, and that was taken over by the Dutch government. Result in Holland, in that 5 to 11 year old age group, 3% have had their full doses of vaccination, and 6% have had their only one dose. And it's not growing or not growing significantly anymore. That's it. After 2.5 years of COVID, and after the policies, that's the result in Holland. In the Netherlands, the total number of the percentage of people with COVID, let me see, it's 46%, 47% of the population has had COVID. It's hardly growing anymore. Death rate is also hardly growing. It's not growing significantly anymore. I guess people are not testing anymore either. Not a whole lot anyway, because why would you? Also in Holland, there's no restrictions anymore. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is, like, in the Netherlands, it's no big deal, and only 3 to 6% of the kids 5 to 11-year-old have been vaccinated, and there's no excess mortality. But make the comparison to Australia, especially Western Australia, still saying this day and age, after experience from abroad, to say like, oh, it's official government policy and it should be school policy that's to encourage children to get vaccinated, 5 to 11 years old. Man, man, know what you're up for. Know what you're up for. I mean, the government message, especially in Australia, has only been one way. Hence the high vaccination rate. Yeah. Um, at some point, if it becomes clear that, yes, side effects do exist. I'm not saying they're dominant, the vaccination side effects, but there are they are significant, but not people are not dropping dead left and right. But the risk benefit is totally different for young children, especially young boys, versus older people. For older people, if you don't have medicines, yeah, then vaccination is probably your best option. It's pretty naive to not do anything. But for young children, on what basis would you think it makes sense? And again, if if in Western Europe with a much higher um, prevalence of COVID, or like there's like, how many countries have had there's like 21 countries that have more than 40% of the people having had COVID. So um, and still the children are not vaccinated. If they had problems, you would have seen it by now. But it's okay. But in Australia, it's still it's still the narrative, especially in Western Australia. Unbelievable. Anyway, what countries have to go through it still? That's my last item for today. Um, so again, all countries have gone through it earlier or later. And But yeah, you've seen probably the news on China, like China completely locking down Shanghai to limit the cases. But yeah, at some point, um, I mean, I'm not sure what in China they keep secret and are not. But you know, um, could it be contained in China still? To me, hard to believe. But Taiwan is also an interesting story. Taiwan island also, upon arrival, mandatory quarantine for a week, I believe, uh, in hotels. Um, they had very limited cases. They had a few cases in the very beginning in 2020, but kept them to a minimum because they had this policy, similar to Australia. And until quite recent, Taiwan only had like 20, 30 cases per day. Now it's in their records, like in the record territory of 3,800 cases yesterday I saw, on a population of close to 24 million. So it's not a whole lot, but 4,000 a day uh, means it's unstoppable. It's a densely populated country, so it's unstoppable, the spread. Um, Taiwan has to go through it too. Um, Lastly, comparison to Hong Kong. Hong Kong had again a strict policy as well, strict border policy and quarantine policy. And a few weeks ago, it started spreading. And in Hong Kong, a quite large proportion of the older population was not vaccinated. And there you saw Hong Kong had one of the highest death rates per capita um, in the world regarding COVID. Um, it was at some point well over 200, and 200 is the 200 per million per week is a rough estimate for the normal all-cause death rate. Um so Hong Kong was well over that, but also Hong Kong um, now it's minimal again. Yeah, it just looks like no matter what the policy was, every country has to go through it, and you can go through it slowly or you can go through it quickly. But no matter what, um, uh, yeah, even if you let it go, um, I think the hospitals can cope. I mean, Hong Kong had a high peak, and you saw some pictures of patients in hospitals, like temporarily parked outside in the open air on terraces. Um, that was for a very short. That was for a very short time. Um, uh, but It's if especially if you have given everybody the opportunity to get vaccinated, let it let it go. People will get it anyway, sooner or later, and the vast majority will get over it like a cold or like the flu. There's elections coming up in Australia. Um, cut through the crap that they say about a successful policy. Think about what they said, blaming the unvaccinated, saying that if you're going to get vaccinated, you're not going to get COVID. All that crap. It's just Omicron is a milder variant. Natural immunity works. That's the main driver for getting over this pandemic. So when you vote, take it into account, I would say. That's the only democratic. This is one of the few democratic principles that we have still. So good luck with it. See you next week.